On behalf of the conveners and organizers of the PSA Specialist Group on Parliaments, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today. This is the second panel of our annual conference, which due to the circumstances we are holding as monthly sessions up until the summer. Today we are going to hear 3 talks about Prime Minister's questions in the UK House of Commons. But now let's get to the important part. We are all here because we want to hear about some of the latest research and analysis of Prime Minister's questions. First, we have Stephane Revillet from the Université de Bourgogne, who will talk to us about the effects of the COVID-19 restrictions on incivility and confrontation during PMQs. Then Mia McGrath-Burns and Mark Shepherd from the University of Strathclyde asked to what extent the priorities of the public are congruent with the issues raised in Prime Minister's questions and in People's Prime Minister's questions. And the third paper presentation is by Mark Shepherd and Daniel Braby, also from the University of Strathclyde, who analyzed the content of Prime Minister's questions from the perspective of constituency representation. Each presenter has 15 minutes, and then there will be around 45 minutes reserved for questions and discussion. And we do not have the virtual hand feature here today. So if you would like to ask a question, please let us know through the chat box. And if you prefer, you can actually also type your question into the chat, and then I will read it out loud. And you can even do that during the presentation. But now, please, let's get started with the presentation. Stephane, the floor and the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to this second panel, Analysing Prime Minister's Question. I've been looking forward to it and to meeting all of you. It is my first participation to a PSC event, so I'm both excited and impressed. And I hope you'll find my paper interesting and relevant. Today, I want to focus on the impact that social distancing has on one of the main functions of PMQs, that is to say, holding the government to account. This is precisely one of the issues the Hansard Society raises in one of its last April publications. In this report, the authors wonder how parliamentarians can conduct their core constitutional duties of holding the government to account when they are all required to adopt rigorous social distancing. I think this question is even more relevant in relation to PMQs, insofar as it's the most attended and the most watched parliamentary event of the week. Due to social distancing, far fewer MPs have been able to attend PMQs, and that resulted in less noise being made and fewer raucous attacks leveled by the parties. Some have praised the change in welcoming a quieter and more civilized chamber where democratic, sensible debates could eventually take place, even though the debates are now, I quote, pleasingly boring, according to a journalist from DN News. However, some others have complained that the so-called Zoom parliament, and especially semi-virtual PMQs, fail to properly hold the government to account. For example, Peter Bone said that the technology is fine for casework, constituency work, but scrutinizing government is just hopeless. You can't intervene, you can't question a minister during a debate. The government is getting a free ride when it comes to scrutiny. Sky News' John Craig recommends that they need the Commons to return to its usual boisterous, raucous and spontaneous normality if government ministers are to be held truly accountable. This is my emphasis, truly accountable. Those remarks beg the question of how disorder is an effective instrument in holding the government to account, and what truly accountable means in such a context as that of PMQs. Based on a quantitative analysis of 2 sets of PMQs, the results of my study are unequivocal. PMQs is much quieter and more civilized than before social distancing. Half as quiet, actually. So if you are interested, I can send you my tables with all the specifics and all the references. I'd like to focus on 2 types of disorderly behavior. Interruptions on the one hand, and on the other hand, unparliamentary language which is here defined as threats and attacks to the face, which I will call throughout my paper FTAs for face threatening acts, or FAAs, face attacking acts. And I'll try to provide an insight into their nature and function as a source of disturbance and disorder. I'll start with FTAs, like insults, soundbites, offending remarks, and so on. Here are some examples from my study. For example, Ian Blackford almost explicitly accused the Prime Minister of being racist, having a record of dishonesty. He called him a liar, even blamed the Prime Minister for breaking the law. Another MP dismisses what Boris Johnson said as rubbish. The Prime Minister accused Keir Starmer of misleading the House. We can hear other insults like Caracas, anti-Semitic party, intergalactic incompetence, and so on and so forth. There are plenty. Beside the adversarial and confrontational style of parliamentary politics, what may account for the extensive use of FTAs lies at the core of the function of PMQs, that is to say, holding the government to account. Interestingly, Graham P. Thomas gives a definition of accountability. I quote, "It is the requirement for the representative to answer to those represented how they carry out their duties and responsibilities, to act upon criticisms or requirements made upon failure, incompetence, or deceit." Criticizing the government's failure, incompetence, or deceit are FTAs per se, which inevitably causes disturbance, especially when the Prime Minister counterattacks, to save face. Such discursive interactions are a far cry from Erskine May's definition of parliamentary language, characterized by, I quote, "good temper and moderation." More often than not, those departures from the rules are tolerated by the Speaker. Very few FTAs are sanctioned, actually. Sandra Harris mentions a very high level of tolerance of illegal interventions. This tolerance towards disorderly language lies at the root of accountability. So it is no wonder that MPs who want to make their point stronger should strike harder, which inevitably leads to an increase in the number and in the intensity of the attacks. In other words, the level of expected accountability might be reflected in the intensity and frequency of the attacks. The second cause of disturbance comes in the form of interruptions. Mark Shepherd contends in his dissertation that interruptions have significantly impaired the scrutiny of government's action insofar as fewer questions can be asked. The level of accountability for him lies in the number and the content of the questions. Robert Pakenham views disruption and disorder as attention release mechanisms, as a legitimating function of legislatures. And I would take it a step further by contending that interruptions do not only fulfill useful purposes, but are an essential and effective way of holding the government to account. Whether they are challenging or dismissive back-channeling interruptions, if we use Cornelia Ely's typology, they serve the purpose of interrupting the scripted speech of the Prime Minister, urging him or her to answer more spontaneously. We can hear interrupting words like rubbish, nonsense, liar, or injunctions like answer the question, withdraw, or some questions like really? The Prime Minister will answer those questions for fear of a snowball effect, or just for fear of appearing arrogant in dismissing those spontaneous remarks. Those impromptu answers are valuable in appraising the government's accountability. The Prime Minister will be judged more on the answer he provides off the cuff than on his ready-made answers. The consequence or the purpose of such interruptions is to warn people about a message that is being delivered. They function as attention getters. Interruptions send out alarm signals to the public. Whether the interruption points out an actual inaccuracy or even a downright lie, it doesn't matter. What actually matters is that people's attention is drawn on a point that is contentious. This can be illustrated by Boris Johnson trying to downplay the Conservative Party's role in the Windrush scandal. And this resulted in an outbreak of interrupting comments and noise. This kind of disruption is likely to rouse people's interest or suspicion of what is being said. In this case, the government's accountability doesn't relate so much to the message or to the speech of the Prime Minister, but to those signals sent out to the public, prompting them to call into question specific points, or even to a greater extent, call into question the person's credibility. That is why the Sky journalist wishes the House of Commons would soon return to its usual boisterous, raucous, and spontaneous normality, which is the only way, to hold the government truly accountable for him. Does that mean that other quieter and more civilized procedures like select committees or the liaison committee do not hold the executive truly accountable? That begs the question of what true accountability means in the context of PMQs. In a system of representative politics, MPs represent their constituents in Parliament and defend their interests. And that is all the more true given that studies have highlighted the increasing independence of the MPs from the executive. Moreover, unlike other parliamentary sessions, PMQs is a vehicle for individual backbenchers to raise individual grievances of constituents. In that sense, MPs are the voice and, in a way, the body of their constituents in Parliament. PMQs is the most attended parliamentary event of the week, a piece of theatre. Joni Lowendowski dedicates a long section of her article to describe PMQs as a major performance at theatre. And that is true that in a theatrical performance, the MPs come to see the gladiatorial contest between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition as a Punch and Judy show. However, MPs, backbenchers, do not remain a passive audience. They play an active role by asking questions while trying to catch the Prime Minister off guard with supplementary questions. But few of them can do it. Few are selected for a question. The vast majority are left with their own means to voice their opposition or their discontent. Another way of making themselves heard or make the people's voice heard is to cause disturbance and disruption by interrupting the speaking debaters. Backbenchers who are gathered in the House acting on behalf of the citizens take part in the debate through the noise they make in reaction to the speech of the leaders. This way of interacting with the executive in order to hold them accountable is popular in essence. By popular, I mean that it is the most watched parliamentary event of the week, and that also means that PMQs involves a way of discursive interaction and styles of communications pertaining to and deriving from the people. In ancient Athens, the thorubos, meaning the noise of the participants, was the expression of the sovereignty of the people, the demos in Greek. Making noise and interrupting the debaters represented an active participation in the debate. This mechanism is still operating in our modern parliamentary system. The disruptions and roar of the backbenchers is the popular expression of the distress, the discontent, or the indignation of the people. And in that case, those feelings are not mediated by long-winded technical prescripted speeches. Unquestionably, this is a more direct way of holding the government to account. Interestingly, the number of sanctioned FTAs and disruptions has doubled over the period of time with social distancing. Several reasons can be put forward to account for such a rise. My analysis is partly based on David Judge's article, Disorder in the Frustration Parliaments of Thatcherite Britain. Interruptions and disorder are the result of group effect. That is to say, the more backbenchers, the more interruptions, and the greater the noise. In a semi-digital House of Commons, the tribal effect is considerably undermined. MPs on Zoom are muted after their intervention. Those attending in person are scattered across the House, and this situation will put them off booing and heckling each other. There are fewer opportunities to interrupt those on the other side of the House. frustration then builds up and becomes a catalyst for the disorderly, non-tolerated outbreaks. The House debates have been subject to a new configuration where the paradigms in terms of disorderly behavior have critically changed. However, MPs have been reluctant, maybe unable, to change their discursive model and are still prone to disorderly attacks and interruptions. It took MPs only 7 sessions before going back to their old ways. It seems that causing some kind of disorder through FTAs and interruptions is a natural and inescapable process of holding the government to account. And that is what true accountability implies. That is to say, making the voice and the noise of the people heard by using the mode of communication of the ordinary citizens. That seems to suggest that the distance between the government and the people should be reduced to increase government's accountability. Let's now elaborate on that premise by trying to answer the following question. How and to what extent do FTAs and disruptions in general reduce the distance between the public and the government? In the orderly question-answer sequences, those disruptions act as meta-discursive, or rather meta-dramatic, I should say, shortcuts or substitutes for longer, more elaborate answers or counter-arguments. This simplification of the message makes it easier for people to grasp the meaning of the spontaneous intervention of a member. Daniel Kahneman explains that the information is processed through 2 different types of systems. System 1, which operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort, and System 2, which allocates attention to the effortful mental activities that demand it. When the message is substantial, System 2 is quickly saturated. System 1 will then take over and rely on simple messages like FTAs or disruptions, due to the cognitive ease that those latter provide. As the message is not mediated through System 2, the communication is more direct. The Prime Minister cannot afford to ignore such incidences, which inevitably are more forceful than a formal statement or remark. For Cornelia Ely, the emotional force of insults is tremendous and outweighs their rational force. And I would go as far as contending that insults produce the same effects as symbols. They condense a wide range of meanings and emotions. For Murray Edelman, people think in terms of stereotypes and oversimplifications due to some incapacity to, and I quote him, tolerate ambiguous and complex situations and respond chiefly to symbols that oversimplify and distort. There is no denying that FTAs and descriptions are more powerful than elaborate, well-crafted speeches, and that is for this very reason that the Prime Minister should be well advised to respond to those interruptions and diffuse the tension by providing an answer or any answer. My point here is that the use of interruptions or disruptions is a way to circumvent rationality, thereby getting closer to the people, connecting with them in a more intimate way.
Stefan, could you wrap up? We are running on time.
As a conclusion, I would say that instead of impairing the government's accountability, disorder is an effective mechanism to hold the government to account. Moreover, this paper interrogates the nature of accountability. Unlike other tools to scrutinize the government's activity, PMQs, characterized by its popular style, relates directly to the public. Accountability in that sense means accounting for one's action directly to the people. And in that fashion, the closer to the people, the better the accountability. And the more people attend and watch the sessions, the better the accountability.